we're going to be learning about music and how it relates to psychedelics. James is a passionate music lover. He's brought some of his fun toys with to share with us. So he's got some information to share as well too. It's going to be kind of a little more Q&A. So you guys go ahead and be thinking about what interesting things pop up and want to make this interactive and fun and lively. And I'm also passionate about music, both in psychedelic ceremonies and on the part of life. So please join me in welcoming James and hear what he's got to say.
Oh, okay.
Speak louder. Speak louder. Can you guys hear me okay? Better? Worse? Louder's better. Here, let me tilt my... Oh, that'll be perfect, yeah. Testing. Alright, perfect. I feel a lot better now. Alrighty, Troy. Well, thank you very much for that excellent warm welcome. I'm going to go ahead and begin my presentation here. So my name is James Hosobe, and I'm a pharmaceutical scientist. And my presentation is titled Turn On, Tune In, and Drop It Like It's Hot, an exploration of music and psychedelics. All right, let's begin. So, does anybody know the gentleman on the left? Any? Very close. Is it Huxley? Bingo, yes, indeed. This is Aldous Huxley. And he had a quote that said, "After silence, which comes nearest to expressing the inexpressible, is music." And as a musician, a music lover, and a music enthusiast, I can say that this speaks to me on various levels. And hopefully at the end of this presentation, you guys will understand why it means so much to me, and hopefully it reflects positively in your own lives. So a little self-introduction here. I got my Bachelor's of Science from the University of Arizona, and I studied Japanese studies, and I emphasized in Zen Buddhism. My interests involved consciousness, meditation, altered states of consciousness, and Eastern ideology. My lineage, my father was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, and my mother is a beautiful Californian woman, and so I have the cross between the East and the West. And I feel like it is so awesome to be able to learn from various different types of cultures.
I'm a stage crasher. Hey.
Yeah, sure. All right, is this better? All right, better. All right. So I did my senior capstone in suicidology, and the reason why I chose this very dark subject was because I was so fascinated in other people's lives that lived nothing like my own. I'll say that I was very blessed and humbled to not have ever experienced a close relative or loved one that had committed suicide. And so I really delved into the research, and I noticed that I really lacked the hard sciences. And at that point, I went to the Arizona State University, and I studied medicinal chemistry. And with that, I learned about various different types of psychoactive substances, neuropharmacology, toxicology, and then in my professional career, I worked as a scribe in the medical emergency department alongside a patient-client liaison at an addiction medicine center where we helped rehabilitate individuals with various substance use disorders. And then I found this program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it is a master's program in pharmaceutical sciences, but it's the first kind that emphasizes in psychoactive substances, specifically psychedelics. And my research interests varied between the psychotherapy aspect, the harm reduction that goes along with psychedelic education. But then I looked at my professional experiences. So I worked at a CRO at LabCorp Covance, where we investigated various neuro preclinical trials. And then I had the pleasure and honor of assisting with a phase 3 clinical trial at the USANA Institute on depression and major depressive disorder. Now, I love music, and I come from a very musically inclined family. This is younger James, about a decade ago, at the University of Arizona, playing in their jazz band. One of the most hardest one-credit courses I've ever taken in my life. On the top here, this is my grandfather on my mother's side. On the far right, next to the drummer, that is my rock star grandpa playing the bass. And then my great uncle over here, Uncle John over here, his brother, is playing the electric guitar. On the bottom left, we'll have a little family jam sesh over here with my cousin-in-law, and then my two little brothers who are identical twins. One plays the bass, the other plays the electric guitar. I myself am an amateur pianist, but I am trying to get better. And I mostly look at what is about music. What makes music so special? Why is music even important? Well, after doing some research, it's suggested to believe that music actually came before language. I'm going to demonstrate this little music video as to why the music is important. If any of you guys are familiar with Star Wars, it definitely changes the thematic anger and passion and darkness of the mighty Darth Vader, and instead it turned more into a seductive love story there. So, the music is very important. So, the power of music. And I wanted to perform a little exercise here. So, I want you to think about music or a song that puts you into a good mood. Just at a raise of hands, what's a song that really speaks passionately to you, or an artist that you truly like?
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Earth, Wind, and Fire. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Blood in This Moment.
Blood in This Moment. Okay, very cool. Madonna.
Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen.
Queen, yes. Bohemian Rhapsody. So, obviously, there are music that we can listen to that will elicit a positive or good mood. Now, I'm going to say sorry for this next one. Think of a song that reminds you about your ex. You probably got chills, maybe a little bit, why is he digging up my past? And it's funny because my sister-in-law earlier at lunch said, James, I was driving with my husband and yeah, there's a song that I was listening to and I got really teary. And I was like, yeah, it's probably because that music that you were listening to is so heavily intertwined with the amygdala, which is very emotionality based. And who's to say that with our strong, passionate memory, which is heavily intertwined with music, it can make a certain emotionality blend towards one road over the other in this example. So music can either put you in a really positive mood or it can put you in a very sour mood. What's your favorite genre? I'll start. Mine is heavy metal and jazz. Why? Well, because I love controlled chaos. I think that our life in the world is so chaotic and crazy and going at 1,000,000 miles per second. And so to help my brain and calm my brain, loud screaming vocals and a heavy bass drum, or even in a jazz sense, a very nice saxophone or a trumpet really soothes my mind. And with the amount of different genres that are out there today, I mean, this little diagram here doesn't even come close to the amount of genres that Spotify has listed. I don't know if you guys do your annual Spotify wrap-ups every year, but if you do, there's a section in there that will ask or will inform you of the different types of genres that you've listened to. Well, if you were keen to this little box over here, there is a genre of music called psychedelic rock. Well, what does that encompass? Well, let's first go back to the basics here with music. And I just gotta first give a disclaimer. I am no music major, and I am still a student of music. And as we can tell, this is the skeletal anatomy of music. You've got your melody. your harmony, the speed of the music, the rhythm, the type of dynamics of the music. Are there violins? Is there an upright bass? Is there an electric bass? See, changes in the instrumentation of music can completely alter the entire course of how the music feels, which is why I think the complexity of music in terms of psychedelia, because as we all know, psychedelics is very, very complex as a field. When you intertwine both of them together, it creates a very, very interesting study. So a little overview of my presentation here. I'm going to discuss the historical foundations of psychedelic practices with indigenous perspectives alongside Helen Bonney, a music therapist of the 1970s. I'm going to go over perspectives of music in the psychedelic assisted therapy paradigm. Some ethical considerations that I think that need to be addressed because I'm a harm reductionist. And human safety is always number one, and I should probably have started that with my presentation. I love researching psychedelics. I believe that they can be therapeutic for many. However, they're not for everybody, and I believe deeply that for those that qualify or have compatibility with various psychoactive substances, the therapeutic potential is limitless, so long as there is proper pre and post psychotherapy and you have a very, very strong foundation, a strong group network. That's very, very critical. And then lastly, I'll go over some acknowledgements here. So in the psychedelic assisted therapy paradigm, we often talk about set and setting. The set being your mindset. When you're taking a psychedelic, or even any kind of psychoactive in general, what is your mindset prior to taking this substance? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you neutral? And then the setting component is the environment. So when somebody, especially in a clinical trial, there are many different variables that PIs or principal investigators think about. The lighting of the room. Your trip is going to be very different if it's bright red versus purple versus green, if you have an array of colors. What type of textures are in the room? Is there a fabric? Is there some plush? Or are you sitting on a firm, cheap sofa? The variables within the environment is very important in this paradigm. And I think music, amongst all the environmental setting variables, is the most important, if not most important, right next to the therapist that is guiding you, because there is a quite the not controversy per se, but talk about how music can be the hidden therapist amongst psychedelic psychotherapy. So, indigenous perspectives. So, Icaros, how many of you guys have heard of this? Raise your hands. Oh, a fair amount, more than 50%. Very impressive. So Icaros is medicine music sung by shamans. The instrumentation with Icaros can range from drums, flutes, vocals, and what doesn't really get talked about, which I find even more fascinating, is the sounds of the rainforest or nature. There has been quite an amount of studies to suggest that if you listen to nature, birds chirping, wind, rain, it can actually lower blood pressure. Now, I think it's a really important and interesting question because you can't patent a bird chirping or wind blowing. It's a nature sound. And so when we're interested in different types of Icaros and compartmentalizing, because I would even suggest that different indigenous groups have their own versions. And so it's really important to be very sensitive, I would say, to ancient spiritual practices. And many of these indigenous tribes have been doing this for hundreds of years. And so I think that there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from indigenous culture and music. On the right, there's a shaman that used the sounds of plants as shakers. And I thought that was really cool, using nature as a way to produce sound. So, I'd be very impressed if anybody could tell me who this wonderful woman is.
Helen Bonney.
Oh, bingo! You get 10 points, Gary, yes. Helen L. Bonney. music therapist of 1970, and she developed the Bonney Method Guided Imagery in Music, GMI for short. She worked at the Maryland Psychiatric Center and was overseeing over 600 different cases of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And she actually worked with Walter Pahnke from Harvard and published the use of music, psychedelics, LSD in psychotherapy. And I want to take a little turn here. I forgot to add this into my slide deck, but Walter Pahnke was the principal investigator for the Good Friday experiment at Harvard. Anybody remember this or know about this? Yeah, handful of people. Well, it's interesting, if you read the literature, I believe the test article was psilocybin, if I remember correctly. And what I found most fascinating is people said on that Good Friday experiment for the young men that they dosed with psilocybin, the music was the main component that made them feel closer to God. Had a spiritual tie. So, Helen Bonney had 5 therapeutic objectives. The first one is to relinquish this sense of control. Many times in the clinical trials, we're investigating various different indications, whether it be depression, anxiety, PTSD, and many of these pathologies come from many different types of, I guess, routes. I would argue trauma being the main contributing factor, unlike drugs, what people used to say. But I would say most and foremost that the music, right, when it comes to opening people up, it gives that catalyst for emotionality. It allows people to feel themselves in ways that they haven't been able to feel before. And this kind of bleeds into their second objective, is the intensity of emotionality, giving that sense of release. Music can contribute to peak experiences. Now, what does she mean by this? Well, a peak experience can be very different for everybody, and it can occur at different times for everybody too. I think what they were trying to get at with this objective was a push for when you're at that tipping point of your substance and you're feeling the trip, can the music make it more therapeutic? And her argument was, yes, it can, even more so than silence. And there's a whole field of research that needs to be actually studied much, much more, but a comparative study between silence and these, I guess, water tanks that people can do, and music in general. The fourth one was providing, continuity in the experience, offering a sense of timelessness. Oftentimes when somebody does a psychedelic, their alteration of space and time is distorted. And so oftentimes when people listen to music, a psychedelic can actually alter the tune. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give a brief demonstration here. So there is a compound. Are you guys familiar with the psychedelic called DMT?
No.
Yeah, DMT. Okay, I got a couple people now. Oh, thank you so much, Gary. Thank you. Okay, so there's another tryptamine, a cousin, called DIPT. And from various self-reports, there have been suggestion that this particular psychedelic alters music and pitch by a degree. And what do I mean by that? Well, so imagine I'm playing this, right? If you take DIPT, some people might suggest you might hear this. Right? I gave you a little demonstration of a psychedelic experience, even though we didn't take any psychedelics. Wasn't that kind of weird? Very odd. The last therapeutic objective is directing and structuring the experience. Now, this one I have some qualms with. And I'm going to discuss this in my final points here. But I am a firm believer that music should not be the driver's seat in a psychedelic therapy. You should be the driver. Music should be the comfy pillow or that blanket where when the trip kind of gets a little frightening or scary, we can lean towards the music to help bring us back to homeostasis. And I think it's really important that future psychedelic assisted psychotherapists, physicians in the field, or any of the sort of guides or shamans should really pay attention to what kind of audio stimuli they're delivering to their client. So this was a musical questionnaire. So in modern day research, we have the MEQ, which is the mystical experience questionnaire. But back then they had another MEQ, which was called the music experience questionnaire. My apologies for the very small font, but in the beginning it says practical experiences. Are you yourself a musician? How many instruments do you play? And then there's a music appreciation section. Do you listen to the AM or FM radio? You could probably tell it's a little outdated. How many times a week do you listen to the radio? Do you like music or do you just tolerate it? For that, whoever answered yes to that, and for the toleration of music, I would love to have conversations with you. Because there are so many people that actually hate and despise music, and they just love silence. And for that cohort, I would love to speak to you. Anyways, so, and then the last section, there is music preference. And there is genres, what are called popular. So the top popular was love ballad, romantic, folk, jazz, country western, rock, soul, musicals, march, soundtracks, and waltzes. And then you have a variety of different classicals. Now, I will say, in the current psychedelic psychotherapy clinical trial setting, there is a general, I guess, rule where they try to say instrumental music, no vocals. And why no vocals? Many therapists or guides are fearful that vocals may distort or take away from a thought that the client might have had if the vocal hadn't have been there, if that makes sense. Because like I had said earlier, we want to make the individual the driver, not the music. Yes?
When you say vocals, is the voice being used as an instrument, or are they actually singing words?
That's
because
yeah.
those could be two different things.
Here, would you mind repeating that question one more time?
Are the vocals being used as an instrument, or are the vocals actually singing words?
Yes.
Because those have two different impacts.
That's an excellent, excellent question. So, as you can tell, probably in a lot of world music, you'll get a lot of ooh, ah, oh, right?
Yeah.
Is that vocals? I would consider them vocals. But now we dive into this split between vocals and lyrics, right? What is lyrical? What are actual words being said? And I feel like a lot of guides in the clinical trial realm are fearful that lyrics may derail an individual from their internal processing. Now, that's the thing though, is it's different for everybody. And I'd argue that somebody might actually get therapeutically better if they had their own lyrical playlist. And it's very different for everybody. But I feel as if they want to be more on the safe side and omit any lyrics. However, to your point about vocals, oohs, ahs, hums, it is very embedded in a lot of world music. So if you listen to the Johns Hopkins playlist, or there's a MAPS playlist, there are a couple world ethnic music that involves humming or chanting. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
I have a question for you referencing lyrics. Is it a language that you would understand versus lyrics in a language that you have no comprehension, but the intent of the meaning that reaches your spirit is there? So can you address that?
Of course. Thank you. That was beautifully said, James. Yes, I agree. So for instance, Ikaros, right? That's it's medicine music. For somebody, and I'd be really interested to see a double study, right? Having an arm for individuals who speak the language of the Ikaros theme song and those who don't speak the language, and see a comparative between the two. But I would say though, it's so individual and personalized. I'll leave it at this: what works for you, works for you. But here's the thing though, what works for you might not work for the person to your left or to your right.
I mean, even the tone of the music itself, the rhythm, any other noises from the music is going to steer you in some direction.
Exactly, and so there's a lot of debate in itself right there. That's a great question, or a great statement I should say, is music in itself is pulling you in a direction. And so there's a lot of controversy and ethics as to, you're playing essentially a psychedelic DJ, guides on. And it's like, okay, what music are they putting on? Most likely music that they can tolerate, or that they have to listen to, right? And so it's like, okay, well, just because a guide or a therapist loves East Forest or another, yeah, thank you, yes. I believe that, maybe the client might not like it. Maybe they want to listen to Dark Side of the Moon. I don't know. But yes, that was a great statement. Oh, here.
Can I just not use the mic? Can you all hear me?
No.
So, you can't hear me?
So my understanding is it has to do with the language center of the brain and like basically activating that aspect. So if it's in another language or it's toning or something like that, it's not activating, like you said, the lyrical aspect, which is part of the prefrontal cortex. So that's my understanding. And like opening up the different pathways as opposed to going around in the same, basically like thought loops that we do with our own mental processes, basically. Does that make sense?
I knew you could do it, Keely.
Thank you, Keely. And yes, I couldn't agree more. Well, let me throw the ball in your court, right? Not to get kind of a little sensitive, but right now in our world we have a lot of different issues going on. And what I find so fascinating is if a cohort or a group of people were to listen to a music that they're at odds with, right? That represents another culture that they're at war with. How do you think that's going to internalize with them? And vice versa. And I'll be the first to say, so like I said, I come from Japanese lineage, and if you told my World War II great-grandfather who fought the Nazis that we're listening to Japanese music, I don't think he'd be quite too happy. And so it's interesting about the cultural experiences and the individual experience and how they shape and form different cultures. So I think, like I said, it's very individualized, but you're exactly right as far as like the prefrontal cortex and the language processing goes. If somebody doesn't understand the language, I think that they are more or less steered away, but there could be other thoughts. So for instance, right, so if I'm listening to Maria Sabina, and I hate when I say this, but I just crave carne asada. I don't know why, but it's a link. It's got a lot of Latin roots, and it's very special to me. And so I feel as if your personal experiences, depending upon various cultural music, might influence your overall emotionality.
I'd add also that, even if you don't know the language, you're still maybe trying to figure out what it means. So there's a distraction element of it there, even if you don't know the language.
Exactly. Yes.
I'm a speech language pathologist, so I just want to.
Yeah, please.
I'm a speech language pathologist, so I just want to say that language is actually processed in several different areas of the brain. So, and it depends on like if the music has lyrics or not, because there are areas of the brain like Wernicke's that will understand language, but then like the auditory cortex is where you process like the sounds and the tones in language. So I'd be interested to see, like studies of, how the different areas of the brain are affected by whether there are lyrics and if it's in a language you understand or if it's just, vocalizations.
Yeah.
Complex.
Sure. And you're so right, especially with, I would be very interested to kind of bleed off of your conversation here about damage to the Broca's area and see if there is any correlation between how they interpreted music with, traumatic brain injury. So thank you very much for that.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, please. Thank you.
Just since you mentioned Broca's area.
Yeah.
So there's actually like a therapeutic technique for stroke patients, and it's called MIT or melodic intonation therapy, where you actually use like tactile exercises paired with different tones. So like speaking in different tones, and it actually helps stroke patients regain their language. I feel like, it could probably also, affect, if mushrooms can stop people from stuttering, then I'd be curious how it might help with various like speech and language disorders.
Yeah, thank you. Would you mind passing the mic to Bill? And then I'll get you Gary.
Real quick, given the historicity of probably the greatest sound there is, going back thousands of years, could you comment on that?
Yes. Oh, yes, and there's actually going to be a slide on this. So, yes, very good. Thank you, Bill.
So you okay if I don't use the mic?
Mike.
I get nervous with the mic. So the Broca's and Wernicke, again, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly. When you're dreaming, for the majority of people, that's not activated. So, am I understanding correctly? So it's very difficult to read, and even if you think you're having a conversation, it's rare for people to actually have word conversation, right?
Yes.
So, if I'm going into a psychedelic state, it seemed, and then for me, I don't like music when I'm doing it. It seems like that would be, words going on would be a glue that would stop me from going into that dream state, because part of my brain is going, those are words, those are words, as opposed to I'm just wherever I'm going and the environment is not impacting where I'm at on the trip. But I'm pretty sure music is, for me, like nature, if I'm out in nature, 100%, but music is distracting.
Yeah.
And it doesn't lead me to feel that, if I feel like I'm being manipulated.
Yes. Oh, I'm going to talk about that right there. So you use this word manipulation, and I couldn't agree more. Music manipulates our minds, and it does it in such mysterious and mystical ways. I think that, to your point, thank you for sharing. Music, like you had said, some people love it, some people hate it. And I urge people, instead of looking at this as music in the realm of psychedelics, maybe I should probably change my language as to auditory stimuli. And silence in itself is a sound. It's a silent sound. And so, yeah, I think you've sparked my curiosity about exploring differences between silent trips versus musical ones. Thank you, Gary.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Would you mind passing the mic? Yep, here you go.
Thank you. Yay, the mic.
Yeah.
Kind of just a comment. So last weekend I went on a retreat, and during the ceremony we had the opportunity to have a sound bath.
Okay.
And whereas all the other people under the medicine absolutely loved the experience, it was not for me. And I'm someone who really likes music during journeys and ceremonies. It helps me like really get into it. But during the sound bath, I had to like force myself to astral project and like pump my fist and do jumping jacks over my body because like I could not handle the amount of energy that was flowing. And like for me, it was very overstimulating and overwhelming. But everyone else, it like helped transform them, and like, you know, each sound bowl kind of made different noises than it normally did. The woman said, and she thought that that was because of our energy and the healing that was occurring. But having a sound bath during a journey is interesting. I wouldn't do it again, but I think I was the only one who felt that way.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me it was.
And Casey?
Oh, Coral.
Coral,
Yeah.
sorry. Thank you very much for sharing your personal experience, and you are not alone. I've also talked to other people who have similar experiences to you. Sound baths, right, can be different from shaman or music practitioner to music practitioner. Some utilize the large drum with xylophone-esque, what do you call them, sticks or mallets, thank you. But others can use like almost like a xylophone-esque type. So it just depends on the person. I don't want you to ever feel shame or this kind of distraught of how come I didn't feel this therapeutic proliferation from this music sound bath, but everybody else did. It kind of feels isolating, I'd imagine. No, it didn't? Okay.
No, because I know I love sound baths, and I know that I experience and process things differently than other people, so it wasn't right for me personally. But it was a really dope, I was like the main cheerleader to do it during the ceremony,
Yeah.
and I was the only one who didn't prefer it. So
Well, yeah, you're gonna love it and you're gonna hate it. And also, and you know what's interesting too, maybe, and that's another whole discussion here, how does your mindset prior to the trip affect the music itself and your expectations? So I assisted with a ketamine clinic and assisted with some of their playlists. And one of the biggest things that occurred was, you know, what would work for patient A would actually be terrible for patient B and vice versa. So it's not a one size fits all. But what I found so fascinating though is people would bring in their own music and have this, I guess, self-fulfilling bias per se of I've got this playlist, I've curated it, I'm gonna go to my ketamine therapist, I'm gonna do my dose and listen to my playlist, and it actually turns out to be the exact opposite effect, where it was miserable, horrible, they had a terrible experience, their reality did not meet their expectations, and it actually caused a detrimental effect on their trip by curating their own playlist. Now this is just a one-person case study, but it just still is interesting in that fact where it's like, okay, you know, for an overall experience of guiding and creating the playlist, which we'll get to a little bit later, I honestly think it's just truly about trial and error. And you like what you like and you don't like what you don't like.
I was just gonna say, going off on that, I've definitely noticed
Yeah.
I've definitely noticed the music that I listen to on a regular basis is not what I want to hear on a trip. You know?
Yes.
And I'm also a metal fan. So.
Oh, rock on. Yes, Gary.
I just want to add, it's also, every trip is a little different for
Yes.
everybody. So you might have a great time on the sound bath at another time, but you know, it can vary so much.
Well, and here, yes, please.
Psychologically,
What is coming to mind is that a lot of times when we play music, we're trying to get in tune with feelings that we want or to avoid certain feelings. So when you're bringing in your playlist, you're literally trying to avoid addressing the issues that you're trying to overcome.
Yes, thank you for that. And you deserve a round of applause. This is brilliant, and this actually segues into this little, so I was at the MAPS conference, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, in Denver, Colorado, 2023, and I attended an MDMA music workshop. What I found so fascinating was there was a psychotherapist who allowed their client to listen to sexually provocative music at the peak of their trip. And I just had some questions. And I said, okay, I have some questions here. What is the purpose and intent, right? Are we trying to make our own personalized raves here? Or are we trying to heal and process our traumas? And to your point, how much control are we willing to let go of and put fidelity and trust into our guide or our therapist in curating a therapeutic playlist, or even in a case for somebody who doesn't like music, trying to implement as much silence into the trip as possible. So what does the modern research say? So if you study music and psychedelics, Mendel Kaelin, he is the godfather of music and psychedelic therapy. He published a journal titled Hidden Therapist Evidence for the Central Role of Music in Psychedelic Therapy. Music plays a critical role. Another big researcher by the name of Fred Barrett over at Johns Hopkins University, and he does a lot of really cool neuroscience research investigating different brain regions and how certain regions could be predictors of how different music is either A, being processed, or B, how does it alter our emotionality. So going back to my original statement about music that might make you feel a little yucky or make you feel good, music is so embedded into our memory cortex, right? That I feel as if you listen to a song during a traumatic period, that song can no longer, in my personal opinion, be associated with maybe positive or enlightening moods because of that trauma being so intense, so severe, and you contribute your environment to this event, to the music, and which is why a lot of people get triggered when they listen to certain songs. Yes.
So the Rockefellers are the ones that bought,
Yeah.
the Rockefellers are the ones that bought where they changed the frequency to 432, and the reason for that is because it does alter the state of mind. It's a way to control it, and they've done it in studies even in prisons, and where like private prisons will do where they play certain music, right? And it riles up the inmates, and therefore they can raise more money so they can show that they have rights. There also shows where they play calm music in order to control it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same concept.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, this is a very exciting topic. Obviously, all of us are very in tune right now. That's great. Let's keep our questions to the end, though, because we want to get through James's presentation. We want to respect his time and everybody here that wants to see the whole thing, and then we'll wrap up with questions at the end.
Sure.
Good? All right.
Thank you, Gabe. Yes, and I couldn't agree more. Morella. So I'm sure you've heard of MK Ultra, government experimentation. I definitely and firmly believe that music and mind control could have definitely been a part of their experimental goals or
Oh, they made it public.
So after doing a quick little Google search here on PubMed here, there's about 5,400 different published articles on music and psychedelics. I would like to see this number tripled by the year 2030, if possible. So let's talk a little bit about this neuroscience, since we've been all really excited here. So the one that I'm really interested in right here is the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala, right? So many people say you get hangry. Well, why? Activation of the amygdala. Anger is a very powerful emotion. And I feel as if certain music can either A, activate, or B, deactivate certain types of emotional response pathways. What do I mean by this? So I use music actually in my own personal life to kind of get me through my day. What do I mean by that? Well, in the morning, I wake up, I like listening to classical, getting ready, showering, brushing my teeth, etc. But when I work out, heavy metal. Oh my gosh, I love a good. But then when I'm trying to study or listen to or learn, I listen to jazz. I love Dave Brubeck. I love Coltrane. And I think that if you can pin a different genre to a specific task, it might help you accomplish a goal. Maybe a little Pavlovian dog. So if you hate doing chores, maybe try and find a song or something to kind of prime you to do those dishes or get the laundry done. So this is a researcher's perspective on the importance of music. Mendel Kaelin said, music plays a central role in therapeutic function in psychedelic therapy. Bill Richards from Johns Hopkins, psychedelic researcher, said, I think of it more as a nonverbal support system, sort of like a net for a trapeze artist. If all's going well, you're not even aware that the net is there. You don't even hear the music. But if you start getting anxious, or if you need it, it's immediately there to provide a structure. And I think this was really well said. Use it as a blanket, not the driver's seat. And I'm very fearful that maybe some guides or therapists are going to try and put the music so emotionally intense and provocative and just make it the thing where it now turns into maybe an EDC rave versus let's try to process our trauma. What does the therapist say? After speaking to a ketamine-assisted psychotherapist, he had said the music is a critical element. I speak to my clients about specific music tastes and to create an overall therapeutic experience. I had the pleasure of speaking to a MDMA-trained, or MAPS-trained MDMA and ketamine-assisted psychotherapist, and she had said, it's quite a journey finding the right music. For the pieces we thought could work, have worked quite well for folks. The music is incredibly important. But that's great, the research says it's good, the neuroscience says it's good, the therapist says it's good, but what about the patients? What about the clients? What are they having to say about this? Well, a patient from Mendel Kaelin's study said the sad songs would bring on painful memories, would bring painful memories on, and more happy songs would make me think of really good period in my life. Every new song could bring a different image. However, we have a little bit different. This is from a psilocybin clinical trial participant. The music felt like it was turning my skin inside out, and all I wanted was silence. Yikes. This was a real psychedelic participant I spoke with, and I was in chills. I was just speechless. I didn't know what to say, but it was important information because obviously how beautiful music is, it actually turned to be a detriment to that person's journey. So some ethical considerations in music administration in psychedelic assisted therapy. Sound quality. What psychedelic assisted psychotherapist do you want to visit? The one that's handing out the very nice, cozy, comfy Sony headsets, or the $1 stereo from Walmart? Now, I've had the pleasure of trying them both, and I will tell you, the bass is vastly different. And not to mention the cheap $1 earbuds on the right scratch the inner ear to a way that, oh man, it's not comfy, it's very, very annoying. And for an individual to have to go through an entire psychotherapy for 5, 6, 7 hours, that's just not feasible, it's not realistic. At least with something like this, it could be a little bit more cushioning to the ear. And so I want to bring this consideration of what are therapists doing? Are they trying to find something in the middle? Are they trying to be cost effective, or are they trying to be really cheap? Appropriate volume. This is something that we really don't talk about here in this realm. I care about your ears, and I love music, and I want everybody to listen to music for the rest of their lives. Which is why every time I go to a concert, I always wear protection. I always bring my earplugs. Yes, it makes the concert a little bit more dull, but I am able to listen to music, and I should be able to listen to music well into my 80s and 90s. The thing is the average headset can go up to over 100 decibels, right? So according to the study of the Hearing Health Foundation, anything above 70 decibels are considered harmful. Well, let's get an average here. So 50 decibels is average average noise of a room. 70 is about your office. 75 is landscaping equipment. We're going up to 90 is your hair dryer. 100 decibels is a motorcycle. 110 is your nightclub, although I would argue maybe in Europe it might be knocked up a little bit higher to maybe much higher than that, 110 decibels. A dog barking to 110, and then lastly gunshot at 140 decibels. So that's great. We're processing our traumas. We're trying to get to the bottom of our solution here of healing. And yet we leave our clients and patients with tinnitus and a blown out eardrum. That is not what I want. And so maybe some people have this paradigm that louder is better, but oftentimes it might not be the case, and we got to protect our ear health too, which is very important. There's a lot of really cool stuff right now with stereo and speaker systems. There's this lazy boy-esque type of sofa where you can actually plug in your music and the music will come from the sofa. It is really neat, and if you haven't had the chance to try one, I would urge you to look into it. It's really cool stuff. So I think this is the main event right here, the playlist curation. Okay, I will say this. In my experiences of developing and curating different psychedelic playlists, I will always and firstly say, not everybody's gonna like it. Some people are gonna hate it, and so be it. Because it's music, it's so personal, it's so individualized. And so, let's talk a little bit about psychedelic music here. I'm sure everybody's a deadhead, mostly, or majority of the room. We got Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Room, good old Hendrix, Purple Haze, and then the Beatles up top. I talked to a lot of individuals in the underground, and it's interesting, many people say that if you're gonna trip to psychedelics, why not listen to the music that psychedelics are made from? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, look at psychedelic rock. All of those guys were tripping, and they had really, really good insights, and it blended into their music, and it sounds very trippy. And so it made me think, okay, well, since the clinical trial realm is at this odds of standardization, right? Giving everybody the same playlist, start, stop, and finish. And I get it, in research, we need standardization. But the problem though is because psychedelics are so different, from every trip you start is different, your set and setting is so variable that it can play a huge role as to how the overall trip is being conducted. If you go onto Spotify, you type in psychedelics, there's over 1,000 playlists. And I did the search even further. I typed in MDMA. Oh, lo and behold, MDMA sex therapy playlist right there on the top left. What else do we got here? MAPS MDMA. What is MAPS or MDMA sounds? Right? And then we go into mushrooms or psilocybin. Well, what kind of playlist do we have here? Okay, we got Johns Hopkins, very classical, maybe a little world, ethnic. And then we got psilocybin journey. And what I find interesting about whenever I typed in a psychoactive substance and put playlist, I wonder how much bias the individual has by the title or the colors in which they're clicking on it and as they're listening to it, and see if it plays a role. Ketamine playlist, warm and cozy, perfect trip, the best trip, heart opening is a common title that I see. What about DMT? The DMT trip, frequencies is a big one. DMT radio. So this is my 2 cents on this. Music is music and should not be put into a box, okay? There's no one therapy or one playlist that should specifically be for ketamine, and one should be for MDMA, one should be for psilocybin. No, erase all that. Music has no bounds, it has no boxes. And who's to say that if you listen to a DMT playlist on mushrooms, it might be therapeutic, or if you listen to a ketamine playlist on MDMA, it might be therapeutic. You just never know. So some personal questions that I have is, should there be a requirement for the guide to kind of give a sense of the layout for the playlist? Should there be conversation about the musical playlist before having the trip? Another one that I've been thinking about very frequently is, what happens if they want to skip the song? And I have this weird image in my mind where an individual is going through trauma processing, they're at the peak of their trip, and then they hear this song that is just, ugh, it just doesn't vibe with them. And they say, oh, can you skip it? And then the guide says, no, this is the magic, this is the medicine working. Push through it, push. Who's to say that that can't happen? And so now we have to ask ethical questions. Okay, so if we have another guide or therapist that says, okay, we'll skip. And then the next song comes on, and then they're like, oh, I don't like this song either, skip it. Should we have a skip limit? I mean, these are conversations that I think are very important and should be had. Pushing through emotionally challenging music. I had probably stated this a little bit earlier, but yes, about the guide saying this is the music, this is the medicine working, even though the music is causing the individual distress. Nostalgic neural pathways. Should the playlist be given prior to the trip? This is a huge conversation. Many argue no, because they want the individual to have a novel experience. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're going into a treatment, right? And they gave you a playlist, and a traumatic event happened. You are on a phone call and something terrible happened, and you're listening to that playlist. More likely than not, that playlist might be a little distasteful had you had not listened to the playlist, had that traumatic event, gone to the therapy session and listened to it at a naive state. I personally think that the playlist should not be given prior to the trip. However, it should be encouraged and given post-trip for helping processing the overall experience. And lastly, is it ethical to curate a playlist to maximize the mystical type of experience? The mystical type experience is a very controversial topic here. How do we even define what mysticism is? I don't know. And an irrational fear that I have is you're in a treatment, you're listening, you're vibing to the music, and then boom, your therapist is cheap and didn't pay for the premium, and you gotta save 15% or more on car insurance by subscribing to Geico. What kind of neuroplasticity can occur when you have an advertisement while you're tripping? Yikes. Yeah, that's a big thing. Is your guide, therapist, shaman paying the premium package for their third-party musical software? Or do you have to butt into the ads? Please, I think ads would be very detrimental to the trip in any situation, and I would advise against listening to any type of advertisement. So for future directions, so a alcohol use disorder is a terrible, chronic relapsing disorder, an individual that has a serious issue with alcohol, and within the first year, 75% experience a relapse. This is where my classical conditioning relapse prevention playlist protocol comes into play. I want to urge therapists who are working in addiction medicine to give the client their medicine, undergo the pre and post-integration sessions, but give the playlist after the session and encourage them to listen to that playlist when they feel like relapsing, and pair it with a physical activity, whether it be walking or cleaning. Because then we can hopefully use that nostalgic pathway or the positive events that occurred during one's journey or trip to help remember the reason why they did the therapy to begin with. And hopefully this methodology can mitigate any type of relapse. Pavlovian dog conditioning, I really believe, and I treat myself like a dog sometimes, you know, when it comes to that cue. Like I said, when I listen to disco, boom, I gotta clean. It puts me in the mood. So I just wanna kind of say, if one is guiding another person on a journey, you're playing a psychedelic DJ, and with that holds great power. You change the music, you change the trip. Music's a very powerful tool and can enhance one's journey, but it should not be the driver. Therapists should obtain informed consent and require each individual preference of music and be culturally sensitive. I'm sure that there are many people that wouldn't like to listen to another country's national anthem and vice versa. It might elicit some panic or anger or frustration or rage. And that is because music is so intertwined with our emotionality. Clients should be encouraged to revisit the same playlist to evoke positive nostalgia. Music is medicine. Music can alter behavior. Music's not a drug, but it can alter mood. And then I think that more research in neuroscience is critical, and I believe that we can use music to help alter emotions in different altered states of consciousness. And I know I talked a lot about the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy paradigm with depression, anxiety, PTSD, but I would even like to extend this too to traumatic brain injury, stroke, Parkinson's. And I really, really believe if somebody has a chance, if you know somebody with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's dementia, give them a track that they had during their high school graduation year, and I guarantee you smiles might come up. They will be a different person. Why? Because neural pathways will be reemerged in a way that will remind them of their youth. And it brings it full circle, because I believe that psychedelics really bring us back to maybe our childlike state. So some acknowledgements. I did a poster, and some of my colleagues were Maddie Tollison, Alec Morales, and Sarah Jungman. Huge special thanks to Annie Ortiz and Armando over at Yasona Institute, Dr. Paul Hudson at University of Wisconsin-Madison, Chantal Thomas at Windrush Recovery, Mendel Kalin over at Wave Paths, Fred Barrett at Johns Hopkins University, and Peter Skov Anderson over at University of Copenhagen. So the music matters. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
James, you good with a few questions?
Yes.
Let's take a few questions.
Yeah. I prematurely.
Test.
Okay. Yes.
So you do research in this area, right? Okay, so is there, since ancient times, they have known that certain series and sequences, by that I mean mathematical series and sequences, were important in certain kinds of art, including music, and that certain parts of those sequences in the series actually stimulated certain emotional reactions. So, and you keep on saying that change the music, you change the trip.
Yes.
Has there been any research on using how music affects our emotions to have people connect to experiences that elicit a certain emotion?
Yeah.
And that way design a soundtrack to help a person confront that particular experience or emotional issue?
Yes. That is a wonderful question. There has been quite a bit of research to try and figure out how music can be used to either help lower blood pressure, make people feel less anxious. And there's a wonderful, wonderful talk by a neuroscientist over at Stanford, Andrew Huberman, who talks about music and the brain And there is a song called Weightless by Macaroon, Weightless. Yeah, by Macaroon Union. And there was a study done, and this song helped lower blood pressure, I believe, by 20% in participants, and gave people a sense of an anti-anxiety. I cannot remember the study of the other arm of what music that they listened to, but this song in particular has been very, very well studied as far as lowering blood pressure, giving an anti-anxiety effect, essentially changing emotionality. Now, many argued that heavy metal elicits more aggressive behavior, and it's interesting, after discussing with many of my metalhead friends, they use metal music to actually calm their mind, which might be counterproductive or counterintuitive, I don't know. But yes, there's been a lot of study to suggest that music can alter emotion, and if we can try and find different wavelengths or frequencies that can be pinned to a particular emotion, I think that would be a really cool study. Thank you for your question.
You mentioned wave paths.
Yes.
What's going on with them these days, and is it still a thing, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. So Wave Paths, they're a British company. They were a psychedelic music company. They tried to produce all sorts of psychedelic-esque music. The biggest issue is right now is, I think, pricing and subscription. It's very expensive. And so why would, if I'm an owner of a ketamine clinic, why would I contract out to Wave Paths when I could just curate my own on Spotify? I'm saving money. And so I think it comes down to a budgeting and cost issue. But yeah, I think that they're still heavily involved in their research in regards to neuroscience and music, and trying to create and find different music or psychedelic musicians. East Forest being one of them. John Hopkins, I don't know if I mentioned him, not the university, he's a human being. He's a psychedelic musician himself, and a really, really cool guy. Yeah, I think one of his albums is Music for Mushrooms. But yes, to answer your question, though, I think Wave Paths is still up and running, still doing research, but I would like to see, just more coming out from them, because they have a lot to offer.
So actually, you just mentioned East Forest, and he had I think it was a post the other day on like Instagram or something, or it might have been an email, but regardless, he had some kind of post, and he was saying, I mean, this is what he does, so there might be a little bit of bias there, but he was saying definitively that he thinks that it's much better if you can do like an album or something that's long and consistent than like a playlist. Like, even he's like, the best playlist you can get is inferior to something that's structured to be long. I mean, he makes 5 hours. He has like a 5 hour long album track that's for psychedelic journey. So do you have any thoughts on that, or do you know if there's any other, about if there really is anything that could make playlists more ideal, or you think something like long form like that is better?
Yeah. So East Forest is a psychedelic musician, and yes, he came out with an Instagram post maybe a month or two ago, saying he was very against the psychedelic playlist. And he believes that it should be more of an album-based. I know somebody in the audience earlier had mentioned the term of manipulation, right? We're putting somebody into a different railroad track here. I think what the cons are of developing a playlist is maybe the structure or flow might be choppy for some, and so now you have to process a new song, or you're getting into a new car per se with a different song, as opposed to an album where the musician has crafted the songs and tracks in a way to create and tell a story. And I think that's what his internal argument was in regards to using a playlist versus, or excuse me, using an album versus a playlist. Playlists might be too variable. It might shock some people or catch people off guard. Whereas playlists typically have a one-way lane.
So you said that you're opposed to giving the playlist prior to the journey, but you give it to the person after the journey. What's your view on using the same song repeatedly for the same person?
Yeah. So that's using the same song on repeat. I think that, or same
playlist.
Oh, the same playlist. Yeah. I think it's very individual. It's person dependent. It might be better for some, worse for others. I'm sorry. It's kind of like a cop-out answer, but yeah, I just think that certain people might respond well to that, but other people might like a little bit more flavors of ice cream during their journey.
Yeah, that just makes me think. It's interesting. So you mentioned earlier one reason why you wouldn't provide it is if they have a traumatic experience while they're listening to it.
Yeah.
But then you would provide it post because hopefully they had a great experience and now they have this nostalgia of listening to that. So then, to that question, yeah, what if then that person has a traumatic experience with that music after the fact, which they had a nostalgic good experience,
Now we're getting to some fun conversation. Yeah. Oh wow. Let me get back to you. Yeah. Thank you.
I actually have experience with this. So most of the time I do associate certain songs with certain emotions, and most in songs that I associate with certain journeys will bring back the feelings from that journey. But I had a really interesting experience recently where there was a song on a playlist that I listened to when I did a mushroom ceremony, and when the song came on, it evoked like a lot of sadness, and it was difficult during the journey. The same song came on my playlist during a recent acid trip that I took, and it brought back in some of what happened during the ceremony that was difficult, but it reintroduced it in like a healing sort of way. And it actually gave me like a huge emotional release, and it felt like it was bringing closure to that difficult experience, like from the mushroom journey.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So, would using something like binaural beats or different frequencies or something like that be in the same vein, or would that? Yeah.
So yeah, binaural beats. So for just a little bit, how many of you guys have heard or have not heard of binaural beats? Have? So binaural beats. So I would consider it a genre in which you put two different frequencies in each ear, which causes an amalgamation to get the differences of that frequency. There has been some suggestion that binaural beats can put one into an altered state of consciousness. It's fascinating research, and it's very well understudied, and I'm glad that you brought that up. A person that's really into binaural beats, I've had really good conversation with, is Hamilton Morris. He did Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. I asked him, I said, hey man, I know that you're really well delved in this. I'm a music guy. What about music and psychedelics? And he said, well, firstly, look into binaural beats, especially with DMT, 5-MeO, Bufo. But then he said, listen, what about silence? And I said, okay. And he said, silence, in the underground, I guess, or on Arrowhead, people will do these cold ketamine runs where they will do ketamine and they will listen to no music. And many describe it as cold, dark, loneliness. And maybe it's all subjective, individual case reports. But it's interesting to suggest that maybe silence could be either one's fear of silence that is portraying the coldness and they're not used to it, or getting comfortable with their own mind. So, but yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yes. Oh, yeah.
We'll take like one or two more questions and we're gonna wrap up. So.
Do you have?
I just
Oh yeah, please. Yeah. Not.
Just wanted to share a brief anecdote first, and a pretty light question. I've done 5 ketamine therapy sessions, and just on the topic of like music that you've heard before coming into the session, of those 5 playlists, there's only been one song that I had heard before. It was all otherwise new to me. And that one ended up like, yeah, completely directing the energy of the experience in a very positive way ultimately, but brings up an interesting point about like you can't really know if somebody's gonna have heard something before if they don't have the playlist. It might be a bad thing, might not be. But also just wanted to ask if you know of anybody doing psychedelic therapy with music playing on speakers in the room rather than on headphones. Like, does anybody try that?
Yeah, so a couple points here. So thank you for sharing your experience. And yes, I like how you said that it directed me. And I'm glad it directed you into a positive light. I think the ultimate goal is to try to have a novel or new experience as possible. And so, yeah, sure, maybe an individual might know 1 or 2 tracks on the playlist, but if the majority of the playlist as a whole is new, it might elicit more of a new novel experience. Now, in regards to speakers, this is now going back to this topic of, East Forest. East Forest is a great musician. He is actually just, if you haven't listened to him already, please give him a listen. East Forest is an amazing, amazing psychedelic musician. But not everybody is East Forest. And so he puts on an actual show. And I've had the opportunity to listen into one of his live sessions. I was non-psychoactive induced, and I felt like I was tripping. I didn't even need psychedelics in order to feel a trip with his music. And so the point being, I think that the speakers and live music will be more of a wow factor versus headphones or earbuds. I could be wrong, but I feel as if somebody is visually watching an individual, because I forgot to mention, in most clinical trials, they have the headphones and an eye shade. So they are not really visually known around their surrounding. But in this case, I feel as if you have a speaker set and a musician playing the music, it will definitely make the music more intense.
There's also vibration, your body's feeling the vibration of music.
Yes, and that's a great point to make. I mean, human beings were pretty much human beings were water molecules, and as we know, water vibrates. Yes. Oh.
You can ask them afterwards, okay. We'll wrap up here. So appreciate everyone. Glad you guys are all engaged. That's awesome. Let's give James a huge round of applause. That was an awesome presentation and a great conversation. I encourage you guys to continue. This is not the end of the conversation, it's just the end of the group conversation. So next week we're going to have another event here like this. We're going to have Frank's going to come and share with us about clinical trials and all that kind of stuff. We're going to do kind of a podcast interview, so you guys are curious about clinical trials, what the day in the life of a clinical trial individual is, both from a participant or someone facilitating it. Come on out next Monday. And yeah, other than that, stick around, hang out, and see you guys later.
Thank you, Dave. So major, minor, diminished. Each one had their own feel and flavor. So in a piano or in any music, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes, unique notes with different octaves. I urge you to look on your own playlist and see what key resonates with you, because everybody has their own unique key that they like. Me personally is E flat. Oh yeah, so good. But yeah, so go home, look up your favorite song, and there's websites to suggest the key signature it's in, and maybe you can compile your own psychedelic playlist to your own unique key signature. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll about your own.